wandering through a wilderness, a forest you've never been to. You're looking for your friends. You got separated somewhere around the lake. You all bedded down for the night while your ranger was on watch. Being that your ranger's favored terrain was deep, dense forest, it made sense that they would be on watch duty. It did not make sense that they would run off and leave you all behind. It made even less sense when eventually, after searching around the wilderness, thinking you're hearing your ranger's cries from afar, only to find that nothing is there once you eventually catch up. After searching around the woods in the pouring rain, you eventually do come across your friend lying down in the grass and the dirt. They are covered head to toe in blood, and they are missing their lower jaw and part of their neck. And as you and your others reconvene around your friend's corpse, somewhere in the distance, you hear your friend cry out. But how can that be? They're right there in front of you, lying in the dirt, motionless. But you hear them cry out again. And it's getting closer. Today we're going to be looking at the Mutant Bear from the 2019 film Annihilation. Annihilation is a film centered around cosmic horror, self-destruction, and fear of the unknown. And one of the most memorable scenes from the entire movie for me is the Mutant Bear. The Mutant Bear is by far one of my most favorite on-screen monsters that I've ever seen and heard in cinema. Because when you can combine something that your audience should know how it works and how it functions, and then they change it ever so slightly to something that you've never heard or seen of before, yet it's supposed to be familiar, and it tugs at that familiarity and unknowing, that's when it gets interesting. Now, I could talk all I want and gush all I'd like about the Mutant Bear and why I think it's very, very interesting, but we're going to do this differently today. We're not going to gush about the Mutant Bear, we're going to adapt the Mutant Bear into a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition monster that you as a DM can use in your homebrew campaign. Or even put it into a spooky campaign that's already pre-written. So what would the Mutant Bear from Annihilation look like as a Dungeons & Dragons creature? Well, let's go and find out. So after watching the film and going through all the bear's characteristics, this is what I've come up with in terms of a stat block for a Mutant Bear in 5th edition. It is a large beast with an armor class of 12 and 42 hit points. It has 40 feet of movement and 30 feet of swimming speed, because bears can naturally swim pretty decently well. It has a strength of 20, a dex of 10, a constitution of 16, an intelligence of 5, a wisdom of 12, and an 8 in charisma. Now, astute of you are probably looking at this and going, a 5 in intelligence and an 8 in charisma for a bear? Hold on a moment. I'll explain why in a minute. Looking through its skills, it has an intimidation of +1 and a perception of +3. It is immune to being blinded, frightened, or poisoned. Now, why is that? Well, the Mutant Bear is actually blind already. Looking closely at how it's depicted, it only has one eye in one of its sockets, and that eye actually takes up both the socket of the skull infused on its head as well as its own skull. But it's hard to really know if that eye is useful at all to the bear or if it's there simply as a scare tactic, because the bear roams around the room with all of its occupants inside and seems to be sniffing at the air more than it is looking at them, which is why down below the bear still has keen smell. It is immune to being frightened because the bear is already the most terrifying fucking thing in the woods, and it's very difficult to believe that anything could frighten it. It is also immune to being poisoned because, well, half of its face is already just bone. I don't think you can poison a creature like this. It cannot speak any languages on its own. However, it does have the ability Mimicry, which will bring us right over to its abilities. We've already established that it has keen smell, giving it advantage on perception checks that rely on smell. Now here's where we get into the abilities that make the Mutant Bear what it is and sets it apart from regular bears in 5th edition. The bear can mimic sounds made by the last creature it killed. A creature that hears the sounds the bear makes can tell they are imitations with a successful wisdom insight check opposed by the bear's charisma deception check. This is why the bear has an 8 in charisma. Now, an 8 in charisma is not exceptionally high. It does give it a -1 to charisma checks, but if we're going based off the sounds that it makes in the film, They're not perfect adaptations by any means. They're mixed in with this awful, howling, bearish-like noises. Thus, the -1 I feel is still applicable. And then by far its most powerful ability, Unworldly Visage. Each creature within 80 feet of the bear that can see or hear it must succeed on a DC 13 Wisdom saving throw or be frightened for 1 minute. If the save fails by 5 or more, the target is also paralyzed. A creature affected by this can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the conditions on itself on a success. If a target saving throw is successful or the effects end for it, the target is immune to the bear's Unworldly Visage for the next 24 hours. After using its Unworldly Visage, that is where the bear can then decide to make either 1 bite or 1 claw attack. Or it can forego using Unworldly Visage and instead make a multi-attack, doing 1 bite and 1 claw. In terms of damage output, the Mutant Bear is exactly the same as a polar bear with its bite and claw attacks. However, the Unworldly Visage is where it really sets it apart from a polar bear. Being able to frighten and potentially paralyze its prey before then biting or clawing into it sets this apart and will become much more terrifying, because looking at 1d8 plus 5 piercing damage, yeah, that for early level characters that can kind of suck, but now if that character is both frightened and paralyzed and then can no longer move and attacks now become criticals, that bite and claw attack is suddenly looking much more vicious. Something important that I want to make sure I get across is that the Mutant Bear is much more than just its stat block. Yes, its abilities are what make it a Mutant Bear versus a regular bear, but also you have to set the scene well. The Mutant Bear does not show itself immediately. It does not come onto the screen yelling and roaring and trying to terrify right from the get-go. It stalks, it hunts, it mimics, it knows how to scare your party before your party ever sees it. And I think that is what will make the Mutant Bear a memorable encounter for your players. Not the fight itself, but the lead up, the anticipation, the fear of what in the hell is out there, what is tracking us. And then when your players do come face to face with it, it's that much more scary. It's that much more unnerving.